dear UNDP representative, and dear students. On behalf of AUK Model of the United Nations Club, in partnership with Professor Venera Temukai and the Economist Club, please allow me to thank you for your presence. Today, among us, we have a very special guest, and it is of my distinct pleasure to introduce to you Mr. Andrew Russell, UN Development Coordinator and UNDP Resident Representative for Kosovo. Mr. Andrew Russell, Canadian by origin, assumed this position from October 2013. Russell is a leadership and management expert with an experience of over 2 decades working for the United Nations. His experience has been varied, mostly in Latin American countries, including the Cyprus as well. Mostly his work has been concentrated on implementation of projects dealing with promotion of social dialogue, civil engagement, and civil society participation in national development process. Mr. Russell holds a Master of International Affairs at Columbia University, and he also taught Peace and Development and Peace at the Columbia University and Harvard College as an adjunct professor. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Andrew Russell for the topic of today, Opportunities and Challenges for Employment Generation in Kosovo.
So, apologies up front. I'm just coming out of a bout of the Kosovo disease that we all get in the wintertime here. So I'm a little, this is actually my first day back in the office after a number of days out, but I'm very pleased that I'm spending my first day back in the office with you. Has anybody here seen me speak before? You have. Here in the UK or somewhere else? What did I talk about? So there you go. Because I remember, I think officially I was talking about the Kosovo Human Development Report, but we really very quickly got into the employment issue, I think. And obviously, yeah, we have to keep coming back and again to this issue because it's so critically important. The way, if you want to think about what UNDP does in Kosovo, it's pretty simple, at least in terms of how you explain it. We are an organization that was set up many years ago, actually 50 years ago, this year, to help developing nations and the governments of those nations to work more effectively. And we used to do that through a huge, wide variety of ways of working. We used to also be the main funder. Through us, all of the different technical agencies of the UN would get funding as well. So a number of, I don't know if you've heard of this agency called UNESCO, vaguely familiar to you, or FAO, the Food and Agricultural Organization, or any other UN technical agency that you could think of. But then over the years, we got more and more into thinking about, well, what does it take to help governments to work? And often having experts flying in and out for short periods of time is not really the most effective way. And so we started to develop the idea of working more closely and side by side and even through governments as opposed to being an external source of cooperation. And what that's done over the years is it's created a very close relationship between UNDP and the governmental institutions that we work with. Now, downside of that as well is that sometimes you want to work with more than just governments on certain issues. If you're in a conflict situation, if you have an armed conflict, if you have a humanitarian emergency, there are many situations where we also realize that we need to be able to engage with civil society, and we also need to be able to work with business, private business as well. And I would have to say that as we refined our approach over many, many years, we still find working in partnership with the private sector relatively challenging. Just to give you one small example, just 2 weeks ago, I was in a regional meeting in Istanbul, and I was told that we were pulling out of our partnership with Coca-Cola. And I was like, well, why? are we pulling out our partnership with Coca-Cola? And they said, well, you know, ethically, you know, it's sugary drinks, you know, that rot your teeth, that too much sugar, not good for you. And that's, I guess, true, but at the same time, over the years, we've been able to do a lot of work together, because what does Coke care about? Coke cares about two things most importantly. They need to have a good source of clean water to make Coke, and then they need young people like you to drink Coke. And so they've been really great partners to UNDP on youth, engaging youth, and also on clean water. And so these are the sorts of issues that we still struggle with, but I'm going to talk a little bit about the sorts of things we do here locally, in terms of generating employment, in terms of working with local businesses. I'll show you a short little video as well. But I wanted to go back to the short description of what is UNDP. So UNDP, we still work with governmental institutions. We want, in particular, governments to work. And so we're always looking for ways of helping governments to work better, whether that's working on anti-corruption, which is a big focus for us here in Kosovo, and we can talk about that if you want. We focus also on public sector services, improving the quality of public sector services, and we're trying to also connect our work very closely to the SAA process, you know, the process of coming closer to the EU and meeting certain standards in terms of what governments should and should not be doing for their citizens. And we're very interested also in issues around access to justice. Justice is a very challenging field of work, and there are a lot of different people working in it, but our concern is, and where we've worked mostly, is areas around, for example, mediation services, helping to set that up, free legal aid, other sorts of ways that we can help to make the justice system work a little bit better. So we want governments to work. Second thing is that we want people, especially here in Kosovo, to have jobs. To have not only jobs, but to have jobs that are decent, that pay a decent wage, and that provide you with the opportunity. We did a little test last time I was here where I was asking people, you might remember, I was asking people, would you rather have a longer term job here in Kosovo or a shorter term job in Vienna? And most people went for the short term job in Vienna. And we need to change that. We need to help people to think that they can build a career here in either in private sector, in public sector, and civil society. And also to feel more engaged in constructing a more positive future. Because of course, we can talk a lot about that today, that we see a lot of conflict in Kosovo today that is really getting in the way of progress and development. And we need, we need young people like yourselves who don't fall into that trap, who can find a third way. And in my last talk, which was to young people in Ferizaj last week, I talked a lot about the third way, which is meaning that you actually don't have to be a part of either side of the conflict. You can actually be a third side to a conflict, which means that you're pursuing something that is perhaps helpful to both sides, but that helps to move things forward rather than help us to stay stuck in this kind of endless cycle of debate and conflict, whether it's violent or not. It's really getting in the way. Now, I've already turned off one person already, but hopefully she'll come back. The last thing, and you may have heard me talk about this before as well, that we care about, which we have the least amount of resources and support for doing, is working on environmental impacts on health. And that totally freaks me out, especially when I spend, half of the winter not feeling so well, and I know that it's partly due to environmental factors. That I'm breathing in the cars that are not being regulated, I'm breathing in the cigarette smoke, I'm breathing in the lignite particles that are in the air, and there's a huge amount of work and investment that needs to be done in terms of monitoring and cleaning up your environment so that you can stay here and you can live here and you can be healthy here and not die on average 10 years earlier than the average in Europe. And we need to change that. And but in the end, for me, when I'm feeling like, whoa, this is a really challenging place to work, so many issues, so many problems, actually, for me, jobs Jobs are pretty essential. So let's talk a little bit more about jobs. Let me see if I know how to work this out. So there we go. So, I mean, there's a bunch of data up there. I would point out, you know, the employment rate is pretty bad. It's higher for women, of course. The actual participation rate is significantly lower for women than it is for men. I mean, this is all stuff that you probably know, or at least are relatively aware of. You know, the actual employment rate is very low as well. And the youth employment rate is the worst of all. There you go. 71% of women active in the labor market are unemployed. 56% of young men. And I forgot what the definition that we use, but it's a relatively broad definition. And so this comes from work that we've done with the Kosovo Agency of Statistics and also with the World Bank and others. This is pretty reliable data. Now, so what are we going to do about this? The other, I guess I would point out two other things, which is that, you know, we have to also understand that the greatest factor in the GDP growth, which is like 2% a year, which isn't so great anyway, but most of it's coming from your relatives. Most of it's coming from remittances from abroad or from increases in public sector wages. Now, I'm not saying that the public sector workers in Kosovo are overpaid, but there's a hell of a lot of them out there. And you know that that's built up over time, that there's a huge public sector labor force, there's a huge dependency on that as a source of wages. And obviously, I'm pretty much a failed economist, but I know enough about economy to know that we're crowding out, you know, private sector investment when we do that. And then the second point is that at the current growth rates that we have, the 3%, the 2 point whatever, we can only provide employment opportunities for less than 30% of people like yourselves entering the market every single year. So obviously something pretty drastic has to change there. So again, what are our challenges? We have a low level of economic growth. We're just not generating enough jobs, you know. We have many new entrants in the labor market every year. You know, there are problems with the educational system. Even a place like AUK, which is really trying to make a dent in terms of bringing the tertiary educational system in Kosovo into the 21st century. But there's limits to what you can cover. You know, you do certain things well, but you don't have a broad coverage of what you can offer students. And what the private sector needs. You know, limited internship and apprenticeship opportunities. I spent, with some colleagues, 6 months marketing, trying to get some donors interested in an apprenticeship program that we had developed at the municipal level. And it was primarily focused on minority communities, but it didn't matter. Like, for example, Albanian minorities in Serb majority municipalities, or Roma, Ashkali, or Gorani, or whoever. But anyway, nobody wanted to support it. And I'm thinking to myself, this is what you really need. You need to start building up your resume. You need to start getting that experience. And people told me it was too expensive. And you know how much we wanted to pay people? We wanted to pay them a stipend of about, I think it was like maybe 200, 300 euros a month. And so, I don't know, does that sound expensive to you? Sounds like the bare minimum that somebody might want to get in order to, you know, start a first job. But anyway, so I don't really fully understand that. But anyway, that's something that we're interested in doing more of. Access to finance. There are all sorts of different issues in terms of high interest rates, property issues for women. And then, of course, we've talked about the issue of remittances, which have been primarily going towards consumption, but not as much as we would like to see in terms of investment. So, I mean, we can talk about a few concrete examples in a couple of minutes, but I mean, to give you one concrete example, what we've tried to do under our Diaspora Engagement and Economic Development Project is to work with entrepreneurs in Kosovo who have a steady source of remittances from family members abroad, and work with them to develop a project plan whereby they expand their business and we put in half the resources. It's actually government of Finland, full disclosure, puts in the resources, but we manage the project for them. And then the family member puts in the other half. So rather than giving them, say, I don't know, 100 euros a month or whatever, they give them 1,200 euros, we put in 1,200 euros and they expand their business and they hire a few people. And so these are the sorts of experiments that we're playing around with. What are we trying to do? So what we're trying to do in our work is we don't want to lose track of the fact that we need to have evidence-based policymaking. The pre-election raises in public sector wages is not evidence-based necessarily. There are other decisions that are taken that are not necessarily evidence-based. But we want to contribute to that, and we work with various ministries at the central level, and we do some local regional level focus as well. Most recently we were looking at the job market in the northern part of Kosovo. We see a lot of fragmentation across the different ministries. We try and bring, it's a little weird when it's like an international organization trying to get ministries to work together. We've even had on a couple of occasions ministries saying, oh yeah, we should work together, let's write an MOU, a memorandum of understanding, and it's a little uncomfortable for me to say to them, no, actually, you're just one government. You can work together. That's what cabinets are for. This is why we have, this is why we have offices of prime ministers and things, so that different ministries are working together. You don't have to sign a memorandum of understanding to work together. But anyway, we also work with young women and men, especially the most vulnerable groups, so that they can develop the skills. We do a lot of vocational training, etc. Let me say a little bit more about that. So this is a picture from the video that I'm going to show you. We've been doing active labor market measures for over a decade now. These are very targeted outreach, vocational training, helping to connect vulnerable populations to economic and job opportunities. We've been piloting for the last few years something called territorial employment pacts. This is where we bring municipal government, private sector from a municipality, and civil society around a relatively clear and simple plan that says, look, over the next 2 years we're going to work together, we're going to invest this much, you're going to invest this much, we're going to do this, you're going to promise to do this, and we're going to generate 200 jobs, or 300 jobs, or 500 jobs, or whatever the goal is. And so that has worked remarkably well in Strepsha, and we're doing it in Dragaš, and also we've been piloting in Obeliš and Kosovo as well. And we're looking at ways of expanding that to other places, because it really helps to kind of mobilize various actors, and they have a local, I forget what they're called, but there's probably a word in Albanian and Serbian for it. But they're existing sort of local coordination groups, local action groups that help to keep the process going and keep it on track. And I mentioned Stripsha because that's the one that's really standing out to me. It's like we keep exceeding the targets for employment generation. There was a lot of sort of latent both supply and demand in terms of people willing to work in the agricultural sector there. Social enterprises, it's another idea that we're piloting, has to do with again, for example, in Obeliš, the local schools have agreed to purchase all of their school uniforms from an enterprise that has been set up with support from the municipality and with our support by women, most of them who do not have husbands, who need to find some income, and they're sewing the uniforms. And so the social aspect of it is that the municipality gets actively involved, encourages the school, they make a contract, etc. So it's not purely, okay, good luck ladies, you're on your own sort of thing. There's a social aspect of it, and the municipality sees the value in investing in that. I talked a little bit about diaspora engagement. We can talk more about that. When we do our work on gender-based violence, we also work on vocational training and economic empowerment of survivors of gender-based violence, and we try and connect them up to some of these other schemes. as well. And then we also, as part of our active labor measures, we do focus a lot on repatriated persons, and we have a significant amount of funding coming from the Ministry of Internal Affairs. And this is actually one of my last points before we open it up, which is just that what we're finding interesting in the last year or so is that, I mean, we would love the European Union with its funding to be much more focused on these issues than they are. And we think that as the UN, we think that we could help them to do that. But in the meantime, because they are going to, as you look into the future in terms of sources of financing, of assistance to Kosovo, for growth in Kosovo, it's going to be two things. It's going to be your taxpayer resources, increasingly, and it's going to be, up until accession, whenever that may happen, it'll be EU funding. But all of your traditional partners, the Norwegians, the Finns, the Swedes, etc., all of them are downsizing, all of them will leave Kosovo. They will remain politically engaged in the project that is Kosovo, but they will not be financially engaged in the way that they've been over the last 15 to 17 years. So it's just something we also have to bear in mind. So for me, what's great, it's challenging, but what's great is that, for example, the Ministry of Internal Affairs is investing its own resources into this program that's focused on active labor measures for repatriated persons. Also the Ministry of Labor and Social Welfare, also the Ministry of Trade and Industry, et cetera, et cetera. So what we're seeing is more local contributions to our programs, which is the way that they're going to be sustained over the long run. So just to finalize, here are our results just from last year. So in previous years, we were generating a few hundred jobs a year. Last year was a good year for us. So we work with institutions, employers, and the unemployed, right? We generated 1,350 jobs, almost 50% for women, almost 40% minority communities. And through those jobs, we improved the livelihoods of 12,000 people in Kosovo. Now, that's better than what we've done in previous years, but it's, as you can imagine, it's not enough. If in 2015, what was it, 40, 50, 60,000 Kosovars tried to leave looking for work, then obviously we need to do better. What would be interesting would be to add this up to what, let's say, some of the other international agencies, GIZ has a good, strong focus on employment, also USAID does as well. Be interesting to get together with them and see, are we really starting to make a dent in this problem? Because we really need to find ways with creative people like yourselves to scale up these sorts of activities. Because otherwise, as I said, there's so many people entering the market every year, and we're only able to generate, so far, jobs for about 30% of them. And we have to do much better than that. I want to say, of course, I am ludicrously optimistic. And now part of this is because working for the United Nations, that's your job. You have to do that. You have to, if we thought, oh God, it's useless, we can't do anything, then we wouldn't exist as an organization. So it's part of the job description. But I would also say that it should be part of your job description as well. That I really want to encourage you, as we have the discussion now, that you shouldn't give up. And that you always should remember that, I love this quotation. I get a lot of young Kosovars saying, well, what can I do? I'm only one person. And then I quote them this. Well, guess what? What do you think? Do you think all the great changes that happen in the world happen by animals or by small bugs or by pretty ponies or something? No, it happened through citizens like yourselves, taking charge, getting involved, getting engaged. And that's what's going to change things in Kosovo. We can help you, and we can align our resources and our minimal resources and our energies and our support and our behind people like yourselves. But it's going to be up to you. And let me see where that video is. Okay, there's a thank you. Lovely pictures. Okay, so I have no idea where that video was. She said that she embedded it somewhere, but God knows where she embedded it. Oh, maybe she embedded, I don't know where she embedded it. So well done. I have no idea. But you know what? Why don't? Where's the computer? Why don't we just do this? Let's go to Internet Explorer. So, Lyra, if I was to find it real quick, what would I do? I would go YouTube, UNDP Kosovo. Let's go there. And then let's go here. Video.
Fillon me një ide. Ajo zhvillohet me një plan. Duke punuar së bashku në mund të bëjmë ëndrat tua të vërteta. Së bashku, prej planeve të vogla drejt ëndrave të mëdha.
Biznesin tim e shoh shumë atë madh, do të thënë e shoh biznesin më tepër punëtor, e shoh me zhvilluar biznesin. Ideja ka qenë unë femën, kam vllazën, familjen, do të thënë unë kam për krah edhe ma kanë dhënë shtytje që unë u marr sot me këtë biznes.
Ajo pajisat kryesore janë së shumë domethënë që ato Francë që kemi qenë raket më të i qyrim domethënë janë pajisje atraktive. Sipas asaj kam qenë në kërkim shpëtimin në botë, domethënë që ndërlidhet me këtë aktivitet. Këtë me një aktivitet që ndërlidhet edhe shëndeti edhe siguria.
Kemi rregulluar disa shtëpiza, si këto që po duhet këtu. Gjithë që ka qenë tradicionale, po ka pas edhe përsëri diçka mirë se ka pas shumë sa vjetë atë. Pas 5 vjetë, kjo pas shumë punë, ka pas shumë mirë në rregulluar. Ka pas shumë sukses.
To që të përfshirim svoj firmu, pa që të rishili čak i u Evropu, Nemačku, Francusku, da përfshirim svoje usluge.
Unë kam aplikuar për me bë programin e kabinave në rrjetet industriale, për ftohje, se normal që ato vijnë për transportin e barnave, nishtave, sidomos për shkullancë. Tregoje këtë kanë një proces të tillë.
Për momentin, kushtet në kanë rast pavarësisht në biznesin e Kosovës, po që gjithë ata që janë interesuar të mira në biznes, të kopën biznese të reja, dhe kenë i objektiva të qarta dhe të përpunojnë mirë dhe në tyre.
E pa matë potencialin domethënë që turizmi, që ndërlidhet edhe me sportin pa punët me përpara. Ne të kemi këtyre bizneseve sa më shpejt domethënë, sa më shumë biznese ka të përra për ta zhvillohet edhe malet, edhe përparohet malet, edhe bashkëpunimi bëhet për legalitetin.
Dhe fillon biznesi në kalon rasti se sa biznesi. Nëse nuk e provon të nuk shlarë.
Oh, that doesn't look like one we want to watch. Yeah. Okay. There we go. What did I do? There we go. Done. All right.
Allow me to thank Mr. Enrique for the wonderful and very informative presentation. Now we move to the second part of this lecture. We open the floor for a question from the students, so you're more than welcome to join us. Any questions? Yes, please.
about these statistics, the unemployment and the employment rate.
Mm-hmm.
How accurate would you think they are? Do they contradict the real life unemployment and employment? Because sorry, because
Sir, Siri, did you say something? Speak up, Siri. Go ahead.
Because throughout household we see many employed cleaning ladies. However, most of them maybe do not report themselves. We discussed this in class also with Professor Venera, and they simply do not report themselves even though they are actually part of the labor force. And that's probably does not show up in the statistics. How would you think would we be able to help this problem solve itself, or how would we be able to get more accurate statistics of the true unemployment and employment rate in Kosovo?
If I can, I remember
Yeah,
you also
the
asked
same
this question earlier. He's interested also in the statistics and the quality of statistics.
Yeah.
So, and what also he's interested like what donors have probably done so far also to help Kosovo and its institutions in building a better database, including also like more surveys. So and probably also what has been the role of UNDP has UNDP been involved in this issue? I think I remember you asked this question earlier.
Should we?
I just wanted to get your opinion because I got the professors and I want to
Yeah.
answer yours.
Well, probably her opinion is better than mine, but anyway, we'll come to that in a minute. I just want to see, can we take a few other comments or questions while we're at it? Yeah.
You mentioned slightly, but what has UNDP done in terms of the education mismatch and the labor and the skill mismatch and the job outlook? Like, what are people learning and what are they supposed to be learning? What is UNDP beyond?
Any other question? Please.
So I was reminded from my friend before who asked about the accuracy of the statistics, and I just wanted to mention firstly that there is a very unreliable census that happened in Kosovo, which I always believe it affects the metrics of evaluation of any data set that is made. My other question is that since we are so dependent on remittances and on people that our relatives bring to us from abroad, and that is a tragedy that goes mainly to consumption and no investment at all. How do you see what's the rate in Kosovo? What's the rate of employment every year in terms of how many jobs we have more this year than last year with regard to the GDP? Because consumption is the main. As we know, consumption is the main. The biggest digits are there with regard to the GDP. So how do we see if, for example, our GDP this year grew, 2.something%? Did we generate as many jobs as that, or more than that, or compared to the GDP growth?
I was in a talk with Levent Koro and also with the Minister of Trade and Industry recently, where Levent, he used to work for UNDP, he's now an independent consultant, and this is his passion. And he was sprouting out all sorts of statistics. I would, rather than trying to fudge it myself, the one that I pulled out from the labor force survey that I wanted to share with you guys was that the rate of growth is only adequate enough to generate employment for 30% of Kosovars entering the labor market every single year. Now you're asking a slightly different question, which is proportionately, let's say GDP grew by 3% last year. Did we grow 3% jobs? Right. Yeah. And I'm not. My hunch is no. but to somewhat fudge the answer to both of your questions, I think you should have. Have you ever had Levin come and speak to the kids?
No.
Because this is truly a passion for him, and he's also passionate about the quality of statistics as well. I mean, I'm sure you could find other ways of finding this information, but unfortunately I'm not going to be your source today. I will say a couple of things. One is that this data that I'm calling on may not be capturing everything that's in the informal economy, right? And you know, I'm not entirely sure. You know, I'm always perfectly comfortable saying when I don't know something. And I'm not entirely sure what we or others are doing in particular to help shift, you know, economic activity from the informal into the formal. I know that we have helped a number of small businesses to register themselves. I know that this is part of our game plan when we do training. So somebody was asking about, well, what kind of, you know, the mix match, or whatever you call it. You know, a lot of the work that we do is very specifically on how to create and run a business in Kosovo, and how to do that, and how to do it legally, and how to pay your taxes, and all that sort of stuff. So, I mean, you know, to a certain degree, we're trying to address those issues. We won't get to all of the people who are working informally, doing housework or whatever, anytime soon. I mean, and that's not really a focus. Although it could be, I mean, it could be a focus. If somebody had come to our self-employment program and said, I want to start a house cleaning business, you know, maybe that would have been one that we would have supported, and then we would have kicked in with support and training on how to then develop. Because we don't just give resources to these people. We give them, you know, we give them the training in terms of how to really run a small business, how to create it, how to keep it going. Now, on the issue of the statistics, yeah, the labor force survey. Kosovo's in a weird situation because yeah, there's underinvestment in the statistics here, and there's not a lot of credibility. Our last full human development report, which is the one that I talked about last time I was here, got the life expectancy wrong compared to what other independent reports have done, and that skewed our human development report indicators, and we had to put, you know, kind of a disclaimer saying, well, you know, this is what it is, but we know it's not right. We know it's not right. Now, the labor force survey is something that we do together with the World Bank, and they have pretty rigid standards and quality controls. So, you know, again, I wouldn't argue to say that we're not missing certain informal economic activity there. I'm sure we are, but I am saying that these reports, the labor force surveys that come out, are, you know, you know, they're pretty much, you know, as good as you can get because they're endorsed by the World Bank, and I would go with their endorsement even more than our endorsement as UNDP. The other survey that I would encourage you guys to take a look at and look for is it's called the MICS, M-I-C-S. It's the Multiple Indicator Cluster Survey. I don't know if anybody's run across that yet. It just came out this year. UNICEF took the lead on it, and it was also done independently verified by UNICEF. So these are reports, both the labor force survey and also the MICS survey, the Multiple Indicator Cluster Survey by UNICEF, are ones that are vetted and cleared and independently, and then are posted on the corporate sites of these organizations. So these are, you know, again, I'm not saying that, you know, humans are fallible, but I'm just saying that these are relatively well, you know, well implemented, using a methodology that's clearly applied across all places where UNICEF does this survey. There's a number of interesting indicators in there, and it really drills down also at the level of gender. You can look at gender issues, you can look at education, you can look at a number of different issues that they tackle in that survey. So these are good sources. What are we doing to help make things better? Well, what I'm hoping to do, I mean, we've worked hand in hand with the Kosovo Statistics Agency on our human development reports. We'll continue to do that. So every time we do a new one, we hope that they will get better, and eventually we can kind of, you know, hand this work over to them.
We bring in international experts and who work with them side by side to produce these documents. But we're also, I don't know if you guys heard about the Millennium Challenge Corporation. Has anyone heard of that? Yeah, you have. Okay. Yeah. I mean, yeah, and it's a pretty big deal for Kosovo. So basically what happened was, for a number of years, with a lot of support from Representative Engel, and a lot of support here locally from the ambassador and from USAID, Kosovo has been applying unsuccessfully to have a compact with the Millennium Challenge Corporation. And to make a long story short, about a little less than 20 years ago, USAID got cut in half. Half stayed with USAID, half went into this Millennium Challenge Corporation. It is a what's the word I'm looking for? It is a very rigorous process whereby countries around the world that meet certain standards with respect to their own investment in health, education, fighting corruption, rule of law, etc., can pass a threshold that makes them eligible to negotiate a very large package of assistance. We're talking about anywhere between $100 million US dollars to $500 million US dollars over a few years. So this is a huge investment in Kosovo. And so what we did as the UN, sorry, I meant to say that, you know, that the UN in general, apart from these two surveys, we don't verify and independently produce data on Kosovo, and it's a real frustration, but it has to do with the whole member state status. But what we started to do is we delved into the mixed survey. We looked at other sorts of surveys that had been done. We provided supplementary information for the scorecard for this, and we just threw everything at it. We worked with the Office of the Presidency and also with the Office of Statistics, etc. We pulled together everything that we could to demonstrate where Kosovo really was on a number of these indicators, even when we didn't have them officially from the UN or from somewhere else. And it did the trick, and they passed. And they will, so long as they keep moving forward on these indicators, or Kosovo keeps moving forward, they will get this compact. And so what I've done is I've said, look, let's be serious here. If you really, really want Kosovo not only to be able to perform well on these different indicators, but to really demonstrate to you that they can provide you with very, very credible indicators, then we need a massive investment in this. And so this has to be part of the Millennium Challenge Corporation investment, is to actually invest in changing the nature of the game in terms of statistics in Kosovo so that we can really bring them up to a standard that is acceptable to the Americans, but also acceptable to the World Bank, acceptable to the United Nations, etc., etc. So that's kind of like my dream. We're not there yet, but I think it's just such a hugely important issue here, because you have a lot of debate about, are you doing well on this, are you doing not so well on this, are you doing, et cetera, et cetera. We can have debates, is this really the unemployment rate, et cetera, but, I think, we'll start to be able to move beyond more anecdotal type descriptions of reality in Kosovo to the extent that we have really high quality statistics. So that's has been a big priority for me, and it will be a big priority for me. I wanted to say one last thing on the whole issue of what else are we doing in terms of vocational training and other types of training. So we don't get involved, we don't come here and tell AUK how to teach their classes or University of Pristina or whatever. But we do engage young people in a lot of non-formal educational activities. And so we work a lot, I've used this example a lot, but it's my favorite example, so I'll use it again. So for me, for example, working with Open Data Kosovo, which is a local NGO that in turn works with Girls Coding Kosovo, which is a smaller coding group of young women IT geeks in Kosovo, and I love working with them, with both. Open Data has more of the technical skills. Girls Coding Kosovo, what's interesting about that is that we're engaging them in opening up data, and we're engaging them in fighting corruption. So that's a really important way that young people can get involved in changing the future of Kosovo. because you can sit around and complain about the fact that many of your leaders are corrupt and the money goes God knows where, etc. But to actually get engaged in this work, I think is very empowering and very a good thing to do. Plus, of course, they're fighting sort of the gender bias towards women in IT sector, which is not just here in Kosovo, around the world. So they're my gender equality fighters. Plus, they're also getting some jobs out of this. And I know of a number of the young women who have gotten employment, ultimately being able to prove that they have the skills and the talents to work in the IT sector, even if the quality of the IT instruction where they studied wasn't particularly good. So these are the sorts of ways that we try and find, and I'd love to do a lot more of that, and we've been working on a lot of ideas. We've done a lot of consultations with young people, and we'd love to hear your ideas as well in terms of what you think we might want to try and do to try and help to create a better match between the demand for labor and the need for labor. Demand for labor and the offer of labor, the supply of labor. Have I droned on enough on these issues? Other questions or comments? Yeah, please.
I've seen from the video that you also put some focus on supporting self-employment as part of your employment generation.
Yeah.
I want to know more on the rationale behind this idea, because most of the experience is worldwide, but also the literature proves that supporting self-employment is not very successful. Usually people that try to benefit from this program are not those that have entrepreneurial skills, but are people that want to use this as a bridge to move later to a more stable status of employees. So that's why these self-employment initiatives don't lead to expansion of companies, do not lead to job generations, but require more funding at the beginning. So they're not successful as an instrument of job generation.
Well, I know that we only tipped we're sort of tipping our toe into the water on this one. And I know that there have been mixed experiences around the world, but I think part of what we were starting from is a very low baseline, in the sense that there's very little entrepreneurship. There's very little spirit of entrepreneurship. Yes, we could argue about that, but in terms of the fact that this is not Silicon Valley. This is not a place where 1,000 ideas are being thrown about, and new companies are being started, et cetera, and I think that for us, actually, more important than the employment generation impact of it or the cost benefit impact of it, it was more of an issue of let's really drill. This was a highly competitive process. Let's just pick a few people who have absolutely, if they went on to, I don't know, trying to think, it's not the Apprentice, because that's actually about getting a job in a company. But one of those TV shows where people are pitching for funding for an idea, and that's more or less how we ran it. So it was more of an experiment, and it's still an experiment. We'll see how these people do. But they were the ones who convinced us that they really have a very strong entrepreneurial spirit, and that they will work at this project day and night until it succeeds. It was pretty small scale, so if it's a complete failure, I'll let you know. But I guess it was, like I said, it's more like we're being driven more by a desire with the Ministry of Labour and Social Welfare to really promote the idea of entrepreneurship more than anything else, and more than just simply opening a coffee shop or something like that, but really trying to see if there are some really creative, off-the-wall ideas where people are crazy enough that they can actually make it work. And you need that in any economy, no matter how small. Yeah.
Yeah, with regard to that, don't you think that we should, as a country which, we obviously don't produce enough, not much, but we don't produce enough. And in a system where production is the main, we have seen countries that did not produce were not good at production for a long time, like Greece, and living in a system where production is the main thing, and you know it's all about production, and you have to be productive, then you know how do you think that we should give incentives to become a country with probably the help of economies of scale or other ways of becoming a significantly more productive country?
Well, I mean, again, you know, I don't know how satisfied you're going to be with my answer, but I think that also what's important to bear in mind is what we've been trying to do is we've been trying, particularly with the Ministry of Trade and Industry, we've really been trying to have a dialogue with them, a very fact-based dialogue on how can you start chipping away at this crazy imbalance that we have where you guys import basically, you know, everything you produce anything. And obviously there's some big you know, sort of investments at play. There's the future of Rexodica and other sorts of things, which isn't necessarily export, but it falls under them because they also deal with tourism. But we've had a number of policy level discussions with them where we've tried to use the best possible global and regional expertise that says, look, we know that Kosovo is Kosovo, right? That we have to play with what we've got. You know, we can't create magic out of what we have to create the raw material. So, you know, why is, you know, IT services really a, you know, great idea? Because you have such great human resources, you have a well-educated population, etc. Many of whom speak English, etc., etc. We've also talked to them about different sorts of industries that could be you know, sort of clustered and brought together, and actually you could actually you know, scale up and make a dent in terms of production in different parts. I'll give you a couple of quick examples. I know in the past, I don't know how much we're doing in this now, but we helped to reestablish the wine industry in Kosovo. And you know, and I forget what the name of my favorite brand is, but they're interesting because they're kind of boutique and you can't even find them in the shelves here. But they do tons of, most of their production is exported. You know, and so that was one where somebody somewhere down the line said, yeah, you know, wine. Let's, you know, we can do that. And so we helped to get that started. One of my favorite examples from last year was, I was telling you before about how Strepsia, it just kind of really took off. And it was berry production mostly. A little bit of honey, but mostly berries. And they started wanting, you know, tapping into, you know, the local sort of capacity to produce juices and rakia and all sorts of different really great things. And so they formed one of these social enterprises, and we helped them get it going, and so that they could start, you know, producing more, and not just, you know, selling the berries themselves, but producing more and selling them at a higher value. And we posted it on Facebook, and we got contacted by a slow food restaurant in Tirana that has an enormous demand for natural juices, and signed a contract with them. And now I can't even get a bottle out of these guys because they're constantly producing. So I guess what I'm saying is that, you know, what we're also trying to do is we're also trying to, you know, there's a science to it. So we do a lot of policy work, and we try and encourage a policy debate about what's worth investing in and what is not worth investing in, given the quality of the human resources, given the natural resources, given et cetera, et cetera. We've also done a lot of work in terms of like sustainable ways of using wood and wood chips for heating and all that sort of thing, and how that could be turned into an export, etc. So we're constantly kind of like poking around and trying to see, you know, on, you know, sort of at the policy level, what seem to be good investments for Kosovars. I think where we're, as an agency, where we're weaker than is then how do we, you know, sort of adapt our, I wish that we could work with, you know, literally tens of thousands of Kosovars different types of vocational and other types of skilling programs so to help with that match, and I think that's where we're very weak. Does that make sense? So again, remember, failed economist. So I tend to think more in terms of the people and the human aspect of things rather than the pure economics of it. But this is my story. This is the story that I'm telling. So hopefully it sounds somewhat believable to you. We're trying. And like I said, we're experimenting, and some of these experiments are gonna fail. And I think, you know, it goes back also, and I don't know how much more time we have, but for sure before we end, I want to go back to AUK and how important your role is here. Because what I found, I used to work a lot in Latin America, rather than not using this, but I don't know if this helps or not. But anyway, one of the things we used to do in Latin America was we would create, it was sort of, I started working in Latin America in the transition from authoritarianism. I don't know where you guys are on that spectrum, but maybe you're at the transition too, I'm not sure, but anyway. By the way, no quoting me. Off the record. Anyway, but who knows? But I mean, you have a very, very unique history, and this is what makes Kosovo so fascinating for people like myself. This is why we fall in love with with Kosovo, with Kosovars. I mean, well, not personally in love, but you know what I mean. I mean, you're a fascinating place because who else has had a history like yours? I mean, who else in the world? You should feel proud, actually, of a lot of what's been accomplished here. And I just want to say that, you know, one of the things that we did in Latin America as they were emerging from authoritarianism was we created sort of parallel models of what, in this particular case, a good functioning Ministry of Education might look like. So we created we helped to create kind of a parallel, more efficient Ministry of Education, doing a whole lot of crazy reforms, a lot of experimentation, a lot of really out there stuff with World Bank money, and then we would see how those reforms would stick, and then if they started to work, then we would bring them into the mainstream. And I think that there has to be a lot more experimentation here, and I think there has to be a lot more openness to sort of creativity and trying new ways. And I think universities are the place to start. And I think universities, like AUK, can be kind of, in all sorts of different ways, can be safe spaces where you can pilot, you can do experiment, you can play around with different ideas. I mean, this is how, I went to school for a year in Cambridge, England, when I was 14, and then I went back 20 years later, and I couldn't believe how it had changed, because Cambridge University had created so many amazing, partnerships out there in the world of the private sector, of, all sorts of innovative and interesting things that are happening. And in fact, we were trying to develop one with them last year. We didn't, with the Ministry of Local Government Administration, that we kind of dropped the ball on, that I need to come back to. But I guess what I'm saying is that you don't even have to wait till you graduate. I mean, talk to your professors, talk to your colleagues, your friends, or whatever. Start doing crazy stuff. I mean, Bill Gates and all these other people, they didn't even make it through the end of university. I'm not telling you to quit, but I'm just saying, use this as a time to start creating a better future for yourselves, but also for the rest of Kosovo. This is the perfect time to get started. So, anyway, maybe I'll just leave it at that. Always happy to also follow up bilaterally, and again, I'm very grateful for the opportunity to speak with you today.
On behalf of the UK, allow me to thank Mr. Russell for his presence today among us and the wonderful presentation. Also thank the students with the very interactive questions and wonderful questions, and also the two professors who've been supporting throughout all this time. On behalf of AUK, I also have a small gift to you. Just
Can-
remember us.
Just before you begin, I also want to thank, before you guys start running away, these were excellent, excellent comments and questions. Best I've heard since I've been in Kosovo. And the fact that I couldn't answer half of them is a testament to how good but you got me thinking. So thank you. I really enjoyed it.
So
Thank
you
you so
have an
much.
idea how difficult it is for us to
Mr. Andrew, it was a pleasure.